Today is the 22nd of October, and this day in Baptist history, our reading is Gone to the Baptists. Our passage of Scripture is Acts chapter 18, verses 24 and 26. And a certain Jew named Apollos, born at Alexandria, an eloquent man, and mighty in the Scriptures, came to Ephesus. And he began to speak boldly in the synagogue, whom when Aquila and Priscilla had heard, they took him unto them, and expounded unto him the way of God more perfectly. Revival brings not only numerical additions, but oftentimes division as well. Surely this was true in colonial America as George Whitefield preached the gospel with power. The decadent congregational churches were inundated with genuinely born-again believers, but this caused a problem. The unregenerate membership had no desire to hear the gospel preached, whereas the newly regenerated members thrived upon the message of redemption. Thus, a division was caused in the congregational state churches as the new converts formed new congregational churches that became known as the separate or New Light congregational churches. These new churches were not recognized by the authorities and did not receive the state aid that allowed the congregational state churches to continue their existence. The separate Congregationalists thus found themselves closely akin to the Baptists in the sense that both groups were forced by taxation to continue to support the congregational state church clergy. The dissenters' refusal to pay the church tax for the support of the state church clergy led to continual confrontations. For instance, the following notice was sent to, and I quote, Samuel Perkins of Windham in Windham County, a collector of society taxes. Greeting. By authority of the state of Connecticut, you are hereby commanded to levy and collect of the persons named in the foregoing list, each one his several proportion as therein set down, of the sum total of such list, being a rate agreed upon by the inhabitants of said society for the purpose of defraying the expenses of said society, and to deliver and pay over the sums which you shall collect to the treasurer of said society within 60 days next coming. And if any person shall neglect or refuse to pay the sum at which he is assessed, you are hereby commanded to distrain the goods, chattels, or lands of such person so refusing. For want of such goods, chattels, or lands whereon to make distress, you are to take the body or bodies of the person so refusing, and them commit to the keeper of the jail in said country of Windham within the prison, until they pay and satisfy the aforesaid sums at which they are respectfully assessed. Dated at Windham, this 12th day of September, 1794, Jabez Clerk, Just Peace. End of quote. Stephen Parsons was a native of Middletown, Connecticut, and a member of the Separatist Congregational Church in his hometown. As the congregation grew, Stephen Parsons was ordained, became a pastor in 1788 of the branch that formed in Westfield, Connecticut. During the next 7 years, Reverend Parsons became greatly revered in the area as a preacher of the gospel and a real shepherd of his people. However, in 1795, Reverend Parsons, after careful study of the subject, rejected infant baptism. Though it must have grieved the members of the Separatist Congregational Church, Reverend Parsons was dismissed from the church. 7 members of the congregation followed their pastor and later formed a Baptist church in Westfield. Reverend Parsons was immersed by Elder Abel Palmer, pastor of the Second Baptist Church of Colchester, Connecticut, in August of 1795. Following that, he was called to pastor the Baptist Church in Whitboro, New York. In his diary, Isaac Backus tells of hearing Reverend Parsons preach on October 22, 1795, in Westock, Connecticut, referring to him as, and I quote, much esteemed, end of quote. It is interesting to note that once the evangelistic Congregationalists became separates or New Lights, they lost their tax advantage. Having lost the tax-produced support, and having the same church polity as the Baptists, they were only a step away from being Baptists in every persuasion. Cohen says it well, and I quote, "Gone to the Baptists is a frequent entry in the second record of the separate churches, besides the names of former members who had adopted the principle of believers as opposed to infants' baptism. Few separate consciences escaped the turmoil over this point, and as a result of their churches earned the name Nurseries of Baptists. The problem they faced was identical to that of the early English separatists a century before. Having come out from the standing order, they could hardly fail to sense a vague uneasiness, which is best attributed to the fact that they stood in an unstable halfway house between churches and fully dissenting positions. Many were not prepared to yield their Pedo-Baptist traditions and assume a thoroughly sectarian stance without a struggle, and the baptismal controversy raged just as fiercely among them as it had among their English forebears." End of quote. However, we realize that there are those about us today, like Apollos in the Scriptures and Reverend Stephen Parsons in the 18th century, who are in need of someone to expound the way of God more perfectly. Let us be faithful to the full counsel of God's truth today. To God be the glory.